Thanks again for coming, Frank.
Thanks for having me. I feel very proper.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
So just to start right at the beginning, musicians often have in their origin stories kind of a bit of a musical foundation. Were you a musical child?
Not especially. Actually, a couple of Christmases ago, I was at home and my mum was digging through old stuff, as mums do at Christmas, and she found this thing I wrote at primary school. My mum was my primary school teacher when I was about 6, in which I listed things I was good at and bad at. And on bad was playing the piano, but on good was hiding and secret things. So, you know, win some, lose some. But no, my parents listened to like classical and church music and that kind of thing, and it didn't really do anything for me. And then I was about 10 years old. I sort of now remember it as this happening kind of in the same week, which almost certainly isn't true. But I stumbled across the music of Iron Maiden, thanks to a friend of mine's older brother, and couldn't believe that music could be that cool. Yeah, they had zombies on the posters, it was amazing. And then there was also the Freddie Mercury tribute concert was broadcast live on the BBC. So that would have been 1992, I think I'm right in saying. And me and my sister sat with our jaws in our laps and watched Guns N' Roses and Metallica and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Queen, one after the other, and George Michael and Liza Minnelli, and it completely blew the doors off our taste in music.
So how did that transition from an interest into something that you thought, this is what I'll be doing with my life?
Well, I mean, I think I'm quite sort of participatory by character, do you know what I mean? So the minute that I've got blown away by rock and roll, to use the broadest term I can think of, I immediately started bugging my parents to get an electric guitar for Christmas, and one of the Argos starter packs, black and white Strat, comes with an amp. I always love the way it says, comes with a strap and a lead, which it did. And I still have that guitar actually. And then my best mate Chris, who lived a couple of doors down, was undergoing a similar epiphany. And this is a weird story actually. There was, in between our two houses, there was what at the time I regarded as a strange old woman. She was probably just a normal old woman and I was a child. But she kept herself to herself, and then she died, and when she died, she left £500 to the nice blonde boy in number 16 or whatever, which was Chris, and he used that money to buy a drum kit, and I had this guitar, so we started playing together from then. And we played together in our bedrooms for many years, and had about 8,000 terrible band names, and never played a gig. So that was my first band.
That sounds nice. So you studied history at LSE.
Yes.
Did you have a bit of a musical activity then?
I did. Well, I mean, so the thing was, I got started, the next part of my music was that I fell in love with punk rock thanks to Kurt Cobain talking about punk all the time. It's an open and not very interesting question as to whether or not Nirvana are a punk band, but Kurt Cobain used the word all the time. And then my mate Chris's uncle, who knew about these things, told us that we should listen to The Clash and the Sex Pistols. So got into that, then Green Day and The Offspring came out, kind of just disappeared into underground punk rock. And I did my first tour when I was 16 in the summer of 1998, because punk rock is infused with the DIY ethos, and I'd formed a band with some friends at school, and it was like, well, bands tour, so let's book a tour. And we did 2 weeks around the UK, no one came, we all got flu and lost loads of money, and had the time of our lives. So by the time I got to London to study at LSE, I was already quite active on the London hardcore scene, and I was playing in bands. And I didn't really socialise when I was at university because I already had a scene, so I'd sort of show up and go to lectures and do exams and stuff. But I don't really have any friends from uni anymore, which is weird now that I think about it.
Is there a part of the creative process which you enjoy more than others, like the writing or the performing?
I mean, I find performing easier, I'd say that. I mean, and performing is the one thing that in all aspects of life, it's one of two things in life that I would put my money on the table and say, I am good at this, with no reservations. The other one's Scrabble, by the way. I'm really, really fucking good at Scrabble, excuse my language. You know, the songwriting part I find quite torturous at times, and I don't mean in a kind of tortured artist kind of way, but just it's hard, and it's difficult to tell every time you write a song whether or not it's any good. You know, you hope for the best every time, and in a funny way, it gets harder once you've had some success, because you wonder whether that was a fleeting thing or whether you can reproduce it in some way. So I find that part quite difficult. The recording part's getting easier as I get older. I'm actually in the middle of making an album right now, and it's pleasant to be in the studio and to know what I want and how to get the sounds and the feelings that I want, and to do it quite quickly. So that's getting easier. But yeah, the performing part, it's, you know, Tarrant from the Sleeping Souls is in the room somewhere, and me and the 4 guys in the band, we know that we can take a stage most places in the world and kick ass, he said, totally up his own ass. But anyway.
You said upstairs that you had done some obscene number of live performances.
Yeah, well, I started counting at the beginning, and it's because the drummer in Million Dead, my old band, used to count our shows, and I thought he was mad for doing that. And then the band broke up, and I was really grateful that he had, because then I had a record of everything that we'd done as a band. So I started counting at the beginning. No one else cared for a long time. When I got to show 1,000, I threw a party. It just felt like throwing my own birthday party. But and then by the time we got to show 2,000, which was a few years ago, everybody else was then asking me, where's it going to be? When's it going to be? And then about a week later, people started asking, when's show 3,000 going to be? And I thought, give me a minute. The last show that I did was at Alexandra Palace, and that was show number 2,309. But that's solo shows. I've got about another 500 with various other projects. The only band I've ever been in that didn't count was the first band I was in, Knee Joke, the first touring band, and I'm extremely annoyed about that, because if we had done, I would have a complete list.
Wow. Do you have any really, really gruesome, really bad stories from any of those shows?
I mean, yes, I do. I wrote a book, actually, of tour stories, which was the easiest thing to write a book about, because I essentially just sort of wrote down all my drunk, boring old guy in the bar stories and published it. But you know, I mean, one of the things that's attractive to life on the road is that it is high intensity, and like, it's not just that mad stuff happens every day. It's just that I find when I'm on tour, if I try and think about what I was doing a week ago, it always feels like it was about a month ago. And that feels good to me, because life is short, and that feels like I'm packing it in. And that feels like a good use of my time doing that. And without them mentioning the fact that just insane shit happens all the time. Particularly when you tour with our guitar tech, Kahir, who is a mad, mad, mad human. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's just always fun stuff going on all the time. It's kind of endless.
So you say you wrote a book. What made you decide to write a book?
Somebody asked, and I thought, yeah. I mean, in a similar way to the feeling I get from being in this room tonight. How to say this without sounding hugely self-involved? I don't know. Like, rock and roll is my first love. And this is a long answer to a short question. Rock and roll is my first love, and I've always been attracted to its outsider status within the arts. Do you know what I mean? It's still not really considered part of the family of the arts, and I like that. And even within rock and roll, that's the role that punk rock plays, and I like that kind of outsider status. Having said all of that, I spent years studying and being a mega nerd, and you know, being asked to speak at something like this, having a book that I've written with my name on, feels great. In a funny way, I mean, I'm not sure that it is greater than having a CD, but I'm just used to having CDs. That's the thing I have in my life. With a book, you can hit someone with a book and it hurts. Do you know what I mean? Your critics, you can throw it at them, and it's more meaningful than throwing a CD. And then, I mean, I am now going to blow my own trumpet for a minute. A few years ago, I got asked to do Celebrity Mastermind, and I had to fly back from an American tour to do it, and my specialist subject was Iron Maiden. And I won, and I'm extremely proud of that fact. And I've got a glass trophy at home, and that means, I'm not going to say it means more than anything else that's happened in my life, but it's up there.
Was there any interesting kind of reaction or feedback to the book?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a few people who were present. There's a bold disclaimer at the start that says, this is my version of events, and it was a long time ago, and I was drunk for most of it, so feel free to contest this. And quite a few people did. I also, my friend Dan will never let me live down the fact that I gave him the wrong surname in the book. The thing is, particularly within the underground touring scene, quite often people are known not by their surname, but by what they do. So for example, my friend Simon, who books shows in Cambridge, I know him as Simon Green Mind, because that's the name of his promotions company. And Dan is Dan Marowak to me, and he will always be Dan Marowak. But I thought I'd be proper with the book, and looked up his surname on Facebook, and got the wrong one. So yeah, he rather gingerly pointed this out to me, and I felt like an idiot. So.
And when fans respond in maybe a negative way to the book or to music, how do you take that on board?
That's an interesting question, because on a lot of levels, my job is to present my creativity to the world, and it is no one has any obligation to like what I do, even if they liked the things that I've done in the past. And I can't really complain about that. I mean, it's an old adage in my trade that you don't respond to bad reviews, because there's no way of doing it without looking like a tit, essentially. People are allowed to think that you suck or that you're not interesting or whatever, and you just kind of have to deal with that. There are parts of it that feel pretty unjust sometimes, not least the fact that I can spend 2.5 or 3 years making a record that's 42 minutes long, and the judgment is passed on it in 42 minutes. And I go, but that's my life. You haven't listened to all of the nuances. But then people don't have to. Do you know what I mean? It's not actually their obligation. So on some levels, you have to thicken your skin, and you have to kind of publish and be damned. You know, and also, I mean, it's funny, like, it would be easy for me to just dismiss all criticism out of hand. But in a funny way, there have been a couple of less than glowing reviews of my work, let's say, at times, which have been thought-provoking to me, you know, and which have actually pointed out or given voice to criticisms that I was internally mulling over. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's actually not a terrible way of doing things. On the flip side, I told you I talk too much. On the flip side, one of the reasons why I think quite often a band's early work is its most exciting work, and I think that's true across the arts. And the reason for that is because you're at that point talking about people who aren't used to being subjected to critical glare. And there's something a little bit kind of self-involved and awkward about getting used to being reviewed, you know. And in a way, I really want to not think about that stuff when I'm writing, because I think that if you're second-guessing what critics might think while you make art, then you're necessarily going to make art that at the very least is defensive, if not dishonest. And I think that I don't want to do that.
And on the other hand, your music has such a personal quality to it. It often has a real impact on people. So do you ever get really meaningful, positive responses to the music?
I do. I mean, often. And it's a thing that I do my best to react to in the best possible way, because there are two levels on it. On an individual level, it remains kind of slightly weird and surprising to me. On another level, you know, when I met Adam Duritz from Counting Crows, I lost my shit, and I told him about how he had defined my view of music, full stop, and I told him about how his records had changed and saved my life at various points and all the rest of it, and I've said similar things to other people. So the thing is, I can understand the impulse, I just don't habitually put myself on the receiving end of it in terms of my own sort of self-conception. So I guess I try and be as understanding as I can, and it's a huge compliment. I mean, it's not quite true to say that that's why I do this. I do it because I want to express myself, but to be validated in that way is great.
And do you feel like you put a lot of yourself personally into the music? Do you draw a lot on your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, for the first at least 6 records I did. No, that's not true. For most of the music I've made, I've been quite a confessional, autobiographical writer, which in a funny way, in some ways that's actually me kind of being lazy, in the sense that one of the things I respect about Springsteen, for example, is his ability to draw emotional truths from fiction and from stories about other people, which is something that I've started doing on the last few records that I've done, but instinctively is something I find quite challenging. To say something that's viscerally true, more often than not, I need to draw it from my own experience. I'm aware, of course, that there is a level on which making a career of writing songs that serve as a kind of public therapy for me is a little bit solipsistic. I mean, guilty as charged, you know. But it's true of most of my favourite writers. Do you know what I mean? So if I can draw solace and inspiration and meaning from the work of someone like Aidan Moffat, then hopefully people can do the same from what I do.
Is there a specific song that corresponds to a specific story or part of your life that you'd be able to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's many. I mean, well, one of the bits that gets a bit weird is like quite often. I used the term earlier about music being a form of public therapy, and it is on some levels. And there have been times, and indeed whole albums, where I've kind of written records about my own failings. In particular, there's a record called Tape Deck Heart, which is about a breakup. It's a breakup in which I was the bad guy. I was the perpetrator, if you like. And it struck me that in the annals of popular song, there are lots of breakup records, and they're all written from the point of view of the losing party, which made me feel like there's a gap in the court records. Not that I'm trying to justify myself, but like it just seemed like it would be an interesting artistic angle to write a breakup record from the point of view of the one who screwed up and did the bad things. So I did that. It's then weird to stand on a stage in front of however many thousand people and sing a song like Plain Sailing Weather, which is a pretty excoriating run through my faults, and have people sing back the lyrics and crowd surf. You know, it's kind of like, is that good? Are you applauding my faults? Are you sympathizing with my faults? Are you, I don't know, what are you doing? But you know, it's a compliment. But that whole angle on things, you know, by contrast, like I have a song called Long Live the Queen, which a lot of people have found meaning in, which was a song about a close friend of mine passing away. And when I see people getting into that song, that emotional transaction is quite obvious. Do you know what I mean? They are putting themselves or someone they know into the song, and they're taking meaning from it. And that one's easy. I get that one. But yeah, when people sing along with the I'm an asshole material, it's kind of like, what's happening here? Yeah.
So you mentioned the experience of performing in certain venues. Are there different types of venues, some which you prefer more than others?
You know, I think that the age-old debate about venue size is kind of not that important, actually, in my opinion, from a performer's point of view, because it's just a room. Do you know what I mean? There are more important things: the band, the audience, the PA. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, obviously there are prestigious rooms, and we played at Massey Hall in Toronto. That was incredible. That's where Neil Young recorded his greatest live album in the 70s, so that was amazing. And playing venues, every now and again you play a venue that Nirvana played or that the Beatles played or whatever, and that's cool. But, you know, I think I'm sort of, it seems a little bit like kind of paying attention to the frame of a painting to me. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you're missing the point here. So, and we do a similar thing, just sometimes there's more people in the room and sometimes there's less.
Speaking of Beatles and Nirvana, you mentioned Counting Crows, but are there any other people that you've had a lot of influence from? Yes,
many. I mean, the one that I should probably talk about, although I arguably talk about them way too much anyway in my life, there's a band from Winnipeg called the Weakerthans. The Weakerthans were formed by a guy called John K. Sampson, who used to play bass in a band called Propagandhi, who are a kind of political grindcore band, well, not pop-punk grindcore band. And he left that band and formed a country band. And when I was about 15 or so, and I remember at the time thinking, wait, what? And I fell in love. John and I are friends now, although we're not quite, because every time we hang out, I'm kind of going, a little bit, because he's my favourite songwriter of all time. But we've played a few shows with him. I have one of his songs tattooed on my arm, which makes level friendship harder. But he's a really big shout for me, for sure.
I think we might open it up to audience questions now before you start your performance.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to stick their hand up, yeah, sure.
Let's try and get to as many people as we can.
Yeah, of course.
Hello.
We'll go over here first. If you could stand up, the microphone will come to you. Yeah.
Obviously, you're sort of known for interacting with your fans a lot. So I was wondering if you have any like weird super fan kind of stories or like strange encounters.
Well, the short answer to that question is yes, many. But I'm I'm reluctant to get too far into talking about them because 99 times out of 100, you're talking about somebody who is trying to pay me a compliment, who, for whatever reason, is, struggling with the boundaries of social norms or whatever it might be. I don't want to stand up here and then kind of go, isn't it hilarious, this idiot kind of thing. That seems pretty graceless to me. I mean, there's one I feel like I am. I mean, I get given quite a lot of stuff on tour. Most of the time, it's awesome. I collect American Military Challenge coins and St. Christopher medals, and people give them to me, and that makes me very, very happy. There is a person in the States who keeps giving me these crocheted dolls of myself. And I can't figure out what it is she thinks I'm going to do with them. Because it's not a practicable object. And also, like, I mean, at one point I was like, well, I'll give them to my nieces and nephews who are young kids. And I was like, no, that's really weird. So my cat kills them these days, is the current. So, I mean, but this is the thing. She is, in her way, paying me a compliment by doing that. So I don't want to turn that down, but I still don't quite know what to do with a crochet doll of myself.
Great, another
Thanks.
one then. Yeah, just over here.
Hi.
Hello.
So you and your band are very entertaining to watch performing live, and I was wondering if there's a particular artist or band or a few that you really enjoy seeing live at the moment, and maybe how often you actually get to listen to music live.
I mean, I go to as many shows as I can. Actually, in the last 24 hours, I've had my mind completely ripped apart by a new band called The Armed, who are a kind of like electro-pop grindcore band. They're so weird. I can't, and it's like almost unlistenable, but it's really kind of fizzy and poppy. It's amazing. The last band I saw live that completely blew me away was a band called Horror, H-O-9909 is the band name it's spelt, who are a kind of a cross between like Bad Brains and The Prodigy. And I saw them play in East London and the building nearly fell down. In terms of what we do on stage, it's kind of funny. I often feel like we're slightly cheating in the sense that I grew up going to see bands like Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, Fugazi, who I was mentioning earlier, and there's a physicality to the sort of hardcore punk live show. And I'm aware that quite a lot of people who come to my shows are not familiar with that live show. So quite often people kind of go, man, that's the craziest live show I've ever seen. And I think, oh, you should go and see the Chariot play because they do what we do times a million. So, but that's definitely I think, it's funny, Fugazi are the only band that all five of us agree that we like. And their kind of physicality on stage is something we aspire to.
Right, another one. Yeah, we'll just go here.
Pass it along.
You studied history, and there's a lot of kind of historical moments that come up in your songs. And I, studying English A-level and T.S. Eliot, noticed a lot of the poetry comes into your music. And I was just wondering kind of where else you draw your inspirations from, and what's your favourite place to get that inspiration for your music?
Well, I mean, noted on the T.S. Eliot thing, I've definitely borrowed from him too much in my career. I went through a very fierce kind of late adolescence love affair with T.S. Eliot's work. Larkin, Betjeman, Auden, it's pretty traditionalist, but that's the poetry I'm in love with. Frank O'Hara, I'm a huge fan of in more recent years. Well, he wrote in the 1950s, but still. And then, I mean, I read a lot of history books. Inspiration for a song subject is, to date, something that's more personal, but it's kind of fun to just drop references here and there. The posh word for it is intertextuality. I'm not sure whether I get to use that word or not, but it made me feel smart just then. I'm going to tell my mum I said intertextuality at the Oxford Union. But having said that, I am in the middle of making a new record that is a history record, actually. So I actually went and did research for songs, and it was a completely different way of writing by design, Not that I've necessarily run out of other things to write about, but I just thought that in order to differentiate my next project, I would take a different approach. So that's coming out before the end of this year, so then we can talk about that.
All right, and another one. How about right at the back, just there in the aisle as well? Yeah.
Hi. So first of all, I just want to say that I'm really happy to see Mongol Horde making a return to
thank you very
2000
much.
Trees. this
Thank
year.
you.
And so I kind of got two questions related to that. First of all, are there potentially any new songs in the pipeline? And then secondly, like, how did you come up with these such hilariously original songs like Stillborn Unicorn and Blue Blistering Barnacles? And was Weak Handshake actually based on a particular person?
So the rule with Mongol Horde is it's my uncontrolled id, if you like. I sort of, with my solo stuff, I spend a very long time working over lyrics and stuff. Mongol Horde lyrics tend to be first draft of the weirdest, most absurd stuff I can think of. Whether it's Stillborn Unicorn or, oh yeah, Danny Boyle's nicked my idea for a film. Have you seen there's a trailer for a film called Yesterday coming out? Which is, it's not the same, but it's similar. There's a Mongol Horde song about how John Lennon and Paul McCartney are time travelers from an alternative reality in which they gathered up every #1 hit of the last 50 years, went back in time to the early 1960s, and then became the biggest songwriters of all time because they were stealing everyone else's songs, which then goes on to make Mark Chapman the Terminator, and then the song suggests that Keith Richards is the T-1000. So, you know, it's flights of fancy, and there are moments when I can look back at a Mongol Horde lyric sheet and go, oh, okay. But I think that there is a place in art for that kind of approach and that kind of feeling. I think that, you know, pushing boundaries and being provocative is a useful thing that art does. I think that it should do that from time to time. Anyway, we have new material in the pipeline. Yes, we're hopefully going to get an EP out this summer, although Mongol Horde is the slowest working band in the history of bands. And also, Weak Handshake is about a specific person, but I am not going to tell you who it is because that would land me in a ton of trouble. So.
All right, another question. How about just here in the red shirt?
I think it's fair to say you had quite a privileged upbringing. Did that hinder you at all when you're trying to make it on a scene that's traditionally very anti-establishment?
That's a very good question. I was raised in a middle-class family with kind of upward aspirations, shall we say. Certainly that's my dad's take on the world. And I got a scholarship to Eton College when I was 12. I have to say, I wasn't fully tuned into what was going on when I took that exam, and I was a bit kind of confused when I then arrived at boarding school and went, wait, what? And then, you know, it's funny, like there's a certain subset of people who hate my guts because of where I went to school, which I'm 37, I don't care anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it says more about you than it does about me if you're obsessed with where a 37-year-old went to secondary school. And I firmly believe you can judge people on the actions they take of their own volition rather than things that they do not have any say in. And I found the process of being there pretty traumatic, actually, for the record. But it's funny, the accusation that comes with that is that in some way my success has been kind of bought, which is hilarious to me because, first of all, the idea of my parents... The idea of being able to buy success in the music industry is dubious. Secondly, the idea of my parents knowing who it would be that one would offer envelopes of brown cash to is really funny. But also, I mean, I like to think it's pretty clear from the way my career went that that isn't how it went. Having said all of that, you know, I appreciate that my whole kind of running away and joining the circus thing that I did was very much underpinned by me having the privilege of a safety net, you know? I definitely wouldn't have starved to death if it didn't go well. And I need to be aware of that when I talk about these things. It's, you know, it's all very well moving English, like, jack in your job, just sell everything, go on the road. It's easier to do when you have family who will look out for you. So, you know, I do keep a mind on that. In terms of it being a hindrance, I mean, as I say, there are people who don't like me because of that. I had quite a sharp life lesson when I was about 13, got into punk rock, got into hardcore, discovered that there was hardcore in London. There were real people putting on underground hardcore shows. Oh my God, Walls of Jericho are playing. It's going to be amazing. And me and a couple of friends started going to hardcore shows. And the reason we wanted to go was it was our refuge from the rest of our life, which we thought was crappy and socially unjustifiable. And after a couple of months, there was this moment when a bunch of kids on the hardcore scene discovered that we were getting the train in from Eton College and threatened to kick the shit out of us, which was pretty disappointing to me. I mean, it remains to this day that my primary definition of punk, and we shouldn't talk about that because Jesus Christ, but is that it's supposed to be a refuge, you know, it's supposed to be a place that is safe and non-judgmental to be if you find the rest of life awkward and unwelcoming. And that's emotionally very important to me. So I hope that answers your question.
Great. Another question. How about Just Here by the Wall?
Hi.
You lash yourself to the mask quite a lot in songs, and like they're clearly very personal in songs. Like Thatcher, you've quite stated, you know, you're very open about what you believe and feel, and I'm wondering what it's like to have such a public catalogue of your political and personal evolution. And in Be More Kind especially, I don't know, I heard a lot of kind of reflection on like growing up and changing, because you've been in the public spotlight producing music for so long.
That's a good question. I reasonably regularly get sort of smug emails from people pointing out discrepancies between things I wrote when I was 19 and things I wrote when I was 35. And they go, well, what's that about then? And I say, it's about 16 years. Like, what, you know, I think that people should change it through life and experience. Be More Kind is a record, and indeed a sentiment I doubt I could have embraced at a younger age. Certainly not when I was in my 20s, when I was enjoying being angry and unforgiving and all those kind of things. There are moments when it gets pretty trying. The way that the internet collapses time, if you know what I mean, is pretty irritating to me at times. But at the same time, I think that it would be churlish of me to spend too much time complaining about all this stuff, because the flip side of all of this is that I've spent the last 20 years or whatever it is running around going, hello, pay attention to me, please. So to then complain when people do that strikes me as a little bit having your cake and eating it. You know, and I've said some dumb stuff in my time. So's everyone in this room. And I suppose I could complain about getting more shit for that than someone who doesn't do my job does. But I do my job. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, I can't spend too much time playing the martyr about this. Do you know what I mean? The only thing I can do is try and be kind of thoughtful and rational and reasoned and trying to state my case as it currently stands. But, you know, who knows? I might make a record in 20 years' time called Be Less Kind. And if I do, I'll have lots of fun answering awkward questions about it.
All right, another one. How about Here in the Blue?
I was just wondering if there's any songs on your set list that you consider to be irreplaceable. That's
a good question. I think, well, it's funny, right? Because there is a set list, and a show generally is a negotiation between performer and audience. And I could just write set lists that were based on what my perception of what people want to hear, you know. And on that level, there's a few songs that I generally, people get pretty irate if I don't play. There's about 5 songs that just have to be in, otherwise, like, I get flooded with complaints. But at the same time, like, I don't want to just be someone who is purely motivated by crowd pleasing. I think that one can follow and lead one's audience in equal measure. You know, when I play a set, we tend to open with a bunch of big hitters, if you like, you know, songs I know people want to hear. But then it's like you don't want to just be slavish for the whole thing. Do you know what I mean? You also want to have a moment you're going to go, listen to this. This is some art I have created, and I think you should react to it. So, I mean, I guess this is I'm skirting the issue. I sort of want to be able to say, no, there's nothing indispensable. I'll play whatever I want. And there are days when not playing certain songs is kind of a relief. If you, no, I mean, I don't want to do down any of my own material, but certainly, like, the band and I will never need to rehearse the song Photosynthesis ever again. But then that's a reflection of the fact that it's a song that people connect with, and I don't want to come across as sounding kind of bored by that fact. That seems a bit shit. So yeah, probably. But I mean, you know, Recovery, I still believe, Photosynthesis, Get Better, hopefully someone from the new album as well. That would be nice. But time will tell on that. Do you know what I mean? You sort of you figure that out as time goes by.
And a question from right here in the front.
So one of my favourite songs you put out in the last few years is Silent Key. And apart from having a really good transition between Love 40 Down and that, which I really appreciate, the story is really, really poignant. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about why it means enough to you to write a song about it.
Well, okay, I mean, I was being a bit cryptic about that new record I'm working on right now. I might as well talk about it. I'm recording an album. It's 13 songs of stories about women from the historical record who I feel have been ignored by popular culture. And in a funny way, Silent Key was kind of the first of the bunch, and I am actually re-recording a different version of it for this album. So we can talk about the rest of that later. Silent Key in particular, I mean, I can't quite figure out if I can remember the Challenger space shuttle disaster or if I've sort of pretended that I can. I do know, I mean, obviously the big thing was that Krista McAuliffe was a primary school teacher who was put onto the space shuttle specifically to interest and engage the primary school children of the world, which makes her very public death on international broadcast television yet more poignant, you know. And I don't know, I was just kind of thinking about it one day, and it struck me that there was an artistic angle on that I could engage with, you know. Having said that, I had that as a note in my notebook for years, and I couldn't find a way that felt engaging and indeed tasteful enough, because I didn't want to come across as kind of ghoulish in writing about it. But I'm really pleased with the end result, and you're going to hear a very different version of it before the end of the year, should you listen to the album.
Right, and another one. How about just here in the aisle?
Hi, my favourite album of yours is England Keep My Bones, which I think you said at the time was a concept album about what it's like to be English. And a bit similar to the question asked earlier, it's now 10 years on. How has your perception of what it is to be English changed as you've aged and as times have changed?
Blimey, there's a question. Well, I should start by saying it wasn't really written as a concept album, but because that's not quite what I do, apart from on this new thing. But I sort of, there was a theme running through the songs, which in large part was inspired by the fact that at the time I was at the beginning of doing a lot of touring overseas. Quite a lot of the time, for boring financial reasons, I would do touring in the UK with the band, and I would tour overseas solo because I couldn't afford to take the band with me. So I would spend months at a time being the only English person in a room full of people. And, you know, I remember trying to explain the rules of cricket to a band I was on tour with, and it took like 7 hours. And at the end of which, Casey said, "Let me just stop you and ask one question." And I said, yes. And he said, "Is it true that sometimes they play this game for 3 days and no one wins?" And I said, "It's quite common, actually." And he said, "This is a stupid game." Anyway, so, you know, that it kind of came up as a theme that I was thinking about. And I mean, there was a little bit of me being, I guess, provocative, I suppose. I don't know, it's funny. We live in a world in which a lot of people celebrate their culture and identity, and you're not really kind of supposed to do that if you're English. And that struck me as just a bit shit. I don't want to celebrate the negative angles. And I also don't think that there's any moral content in national identity. You're not better or worse than anyone else for being anything. But I'm interested in, you know, start with the basics of my family history. I was at the time very interested in traditional English folk music, not least because it's not particularly well known. Most people know Scottish and Irish folk music, which is more voluminous, if you like. But there is a tradition of English music, and I was interested in that. You know, I was just kind of looking at my own identity. I was at pains at the time to stress that point about there not being moral content to it. I wasn't even born in England. Do you know what I mean? Who gives a shit? But you know, I was just kind of interested in those kinds of things and what it was that meant that I understood the rules of cricket and no one else did, or whatever. You know, it was willfully misinterpreted by some people at the time, and some other people it struck a chord with. I suspect that my career in Scotland stalled for a little while when that album came out. I'm not even kidding. Like, some Scottish audiences were just like, I'm not going to do a Scottish accent, it'd be terrible. But they looked askance at the record title and they were like, oh, really? So, I don't know, you know, I mean, the thing is, like, I think that I will get to answering your question properly in a minute, I promise. I think kind of second guessing things you did in the past is a little bit of a waste of time. I made that record at the time, I did the best I could. I'm very proud of it. It's certainly done me proud commercially and all the rest of it. I'm not sure I need to spend a huge amount of my life thinking about what I would do differently if I was making that record today, because I wouldn't be, because I made it then. In terms of national identity and Englishness now, I mean, that's a very interesting question with where we stand politically now, and a lot of people have pointed out that there's an argument to be made that Brexit is a kind of English revolt. Certainly, I think that you could make interesting arguments about devolution and the lack of a kind of English parliament within that. I'm not sort of saying, you know, it's unjust or any of that kind of thing. I'm just trying to calmly point out things that might be factors I don't know. I mean, having done that record and moved on from it, I'm less interested in the topic now. Do you know what I mean? I kind of did that. You know, I sort of, my interests in terms of my reading and that kind of thing, like I've read plenty enough books about English history and English folk music now, and I'm quite happily, I'm reading about the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the moment, if you must know. You know, there is more knowledge and more cultures and more ideas in the world than any of us will ever get to, so I'm quite happy to be thinking about other things for the most part.